In question number 11, there are two questions, A part and B part. So let's see each of them separately. So the A part, let Z is a function of two variables, which is f of x minus y. Show that the partial derivative of z with respect to x plus the partial derivative of z with respect to y is 0. So what is given? Let z is given as a function of two variables, f of x minus y. So we are asked to show this equation. So here let us represent u by x minus y. Okay, x minus y in u ብለን represent እናደርግ. So here we are going to apply chain rule. So if u is x minus y, the partial derivative of u with respect to x is 1, and the partial derivative of u with respect to y ደግሞ minus 1 ነው የሚሆነው ማለት ነው። Okay, ይሄንን equation with respect to x ስንሰራው 1 ነው፣ with respect to y partial derivative on sensara minus 1 ነው የሚሆነው። So here we will apply chain rule. So now the partial derivative of z with respect to x ማለት ምንድነው የሚሆነው? The partial derivative of z with respect to u and u with respect to x ነው የሚሆነው። Okay, we have to apply chain rule. So u with respect to x 1 ስለሆነ ይሄ equation ምን ይሆናል? the partial derivative of z with respect to u ይሆናል ማለት ነው። Okay, so say this is equation 1. Similarly, the partial derivative of z with respect to y እንሰራለን። the partial derivative of z with respect to y is the partial derivative of z with respect to u with respect to y ይሆናል ማለት ነው, applying chain rule. So the partial derivative of u with respect to y minus 1 ስለሆነ this equation becomes the negative of the partial derivative of z with respect to u ይሆናል ማለት ነው. So say this is equation 2. So adding 1 and 2, you can add equation 1 and 2 and obtain the required equation. So adding equation 1 and 2 will give us the partial derivative of z with respect to x plus the partial derivative of z with respect to y. This is the same as the sum of these two. Okay, we can sum it up, the partial derivative of z with respect to u plus the negative of the partial derivative of z with respect to u. So this result is 0. Therefore, for the given function of two variables, we will have the partial derivative of z with respect to x plus the partial derivative of z with respect to y 0 ይሆናል ማለት ነው. Okay, now let's see the b part. In b we have let w is f of x minus y, y minus z, y minus x. So this w is a function of x, y, z. Show that the partial derivative of w with respect to x with respect to y plus with respect to z is 0. Okay, ምን ተሰጥቶናል? Here the b part, what is given? W is given as a function of x minus y, y minus z, z minus x. Okay, ይሄንን equation satisfy እንደሚያደርግ ለማሳየት we will apply chain rule as usual. So let us represent u by x minus y, uን በx minus y represent እናደርግ, vን በy minus z represent እናደርግ, and say t is a function of z and x. So chain rule apply እናደርጋለን እዚህ ጋር. So u is x minus y ማለት the partial derivative of u with respect to x ምንድነው የሚሆነው? 1, and u with respect to y minus 1 ነው የሚሆነው ማለት ነው. Okay, similarly the partial derivative of v with respect to y 1 ነው የሚሆነው the partial derivative of v with respect to z ከሆነ ደግሞ -1 ነው የሚሆነው ወደ t ስንመጣ the partial derivative of t with respect to z is 1 and the partial derivative of t with respect to x ደግሞ -1 ይሆናል ይሄንን ኢንፎርሜሽን እንጠቀምበታለን so now the partial derivative of w with respect to x is እዚች ጋር ምንድነው የምናደርገው chain rule እንጠቀማለን this is the same as the partial derivative of w with respect to u with respect to x okay plus the partial derivative of w with respect to t with respect to x ይሆናል ማለት ነው okay ይሄ w with respect to x partial derivative ስንሰራ የምናገኘው so now the partial derivative of u with respect to x is 1 and the partial derivative of t with respect to x is -1 okay so እዚህ ውስጥ እናስገባለን እነዚህን values so this equation becomes the partial derivative of w with respect to u minus the partial derivative of w with respect to t ይሆናል ማለት ነው say this is equation 1 okay then the partial derivative of w with respect to y ደግሞ እንሰራለን this is the same as the partial derivative of w with respect to u and u with respect to y ይሆናል plus the partial derivative of w with respect to v times the partial derivative of v with respect to y ይሆናል ማለት ነው okay እዚህም ጋር chain rule ነው የተጠቀምኩት so here u with respect to y -1 ነው okay the other thing v with respect to y v with respect to y positive 1 ነው so እነዚህን value እዚህ ውስጥ substitute እናደርጋለን so this becomes the negative of the partial derivative of w with respect to u plus the partial derivative of w with respect to v ይሆናል say this is equation 2 and an equation 2 እንላለን and lastly we evaluate the partial derivative of w with respect to z okay አሁንም chain rule እንጠቀማለን applying chain rule this is equivalent to the partial derivative of w with respect to v times the partial derivative of v with respect to z ይሆናል plus the partial derivative of w with respect to t and t with respect to z ይሆናል ማለት ነው so v with respect to z v with respect to z -1 እናስገባለን and t with respect to z 1 ይሆናል so ይሄ equation ምን ይሆናል ማለት ነው the negative of the partial derivative of w with respect to v plus the partial derivative of w with respect to t ይሆናል say this is the third equation say equation 3 now we can directly add equation 1 2 and 3 okay adding all this equation 1 2 and 3 will gives us ሶስቱንም ስንደምር we get the partial derivative of w with respect to x plus the partial derivative of w with respect to y plus the partial derivative of w with respect to z okay ማንን add እናደርጋለን we add all this thing እነዚህን ሁሉንም እንደምራለን and we collect like terms እዚች ጋር observe ማድረግ ያለብን ነገር the partial derivative of w with respect to u አለ እዚች ጋር ኔጌቲቭ አለ okay collect ስናደርግ like termዎችን collect ስናደርግ ይጠፋፋል እዚህ ጋር በዚህ ይጣፋል ሁለቱን ስንደምር the other thing ይሄንን ከዚህ ጋር ስንደምረው 0 ነው የሚሆነው so the sum of all these things by collecting like terms ምን ይሰጠናል ማለት ነው 0 ይሰጠናል ማለት ነው okay this is the required equation in question number 12 using a tree diagram, write out the chain rule formula for the given derivatives ይለናል። so እዚህ 12ኛ ጥያቄ ውስጥ tree diagramን በመጠቀም ለተጠየቀው derivative apply የምናደርገውን chain rule formula ማሳያችሁ ይሆናል። let's see the a part ወደ a part እንሄዳለን። a ጋር ስንመጣ w የሚባል function አለን which is a function of u and v w የሚባለው function it's a function of u and v እንደሆነ እናያለን። again u is a function of three variable u is a function of x y and z ይሄንን observe እናደርጋለን። similarly v is also a function of three variables x y z okay ይሄንን observe እናደርጋለን። these x, y and z are a function of one variable, so they are a function of t only. So this is roughly the the tree diagram that represents this function of several variable. Tree diagram ይሄንን ይመስላል okay. So now the question is what is dw by dt? okay ይሄ tree diagram ቀጥታ dw by dt ምን እንደሚመስል ይመራናል ማለት ነው። so dw by dt ለማግኘት there are 6 different paths okay ከw ተነስተን ወደ t የምንሄድበት 6 ፓዝ አለን ማለት ነው። እነዛን ፓዝ ፕሮፐርሊ በማየት የተጠየቀውን ዴሪቬቲቭ እንመልሳለን ማለት ነው። so dw by dt is equivalent to the partial derivative of w with respect to u and u with respect to x and dx by dt ይሄ አንደኛው ፓዝ ነው okay ይሄ ፓዝ ምንድነው? along this path partial derivative of w with respect to u እንሰራለን u ደግሞ with respect to x እንሰራና እዚህ ጋር function of one variable ጋር dx by dt ይኖረናል። this is one path እያለ 6 path ይኖረናል። so the partial derivative of w with respect to u and u with respect to y dy by dt is the second path. The partial derivative of w with respect to u with respect to z, the dz by dt is the third path. okay አሁን በu በኩል ያለውን path ጨርሰናል። ወደ v እንመጣለን። so it becomes the partial derivative of w with respect to v with respect to x then dx by dt plus the partial derivative of w with respect to v with respect to y dy by dt plus the partial derivative of w with respect to v and v with respect to z then dz by dt. so this is the required chain rule that we can apply to determine dw by dt okay የኤም part በዚህ way ነው የምንመልሰው ማለት ነው። now let's see the b part b ጋር ስንመጣ w የሚባል function አለን which is a function of three variables x y and z x y and z okay እያንዳንዱ እነዚህ x y and z they are a function of two variables u and v. x is a function of u and v, y is a function of u and v, and z is also a function of u and v. okay this is the required tree diagram. okay አሁን ከዚህ tree diagram ተነስተን the partial derivative of w with respect to u and the partial derivative of w with respect to v እንሰራለን ማለት ነው። okay w with respect to u ስንሰራ we will have three paths. one path from w to u, the other path the third path. okay each of these paths are እዚች ጋር w with respect to x ይኖረናል እዚህ ጋር ደግሞ x with respect to u ይኖረናል ማለት ነው okay and the partial derivative of w with respect to y and the partial derivative of y with respect to u is the second path. The third path, the partial derivative of w with respect to z and z with respect to u ይሄ ነው ማለት ነው so these are the three paths to determine the partial derivative of w with respect to u so ይሄንን chain rule ስናስቀምጥ ምን ይሆናል ማለት ነው the partial derivative of w with respect to u is equivalent to w with respect to x with respect to u, this is one path, plus the partial derivative of w with respect to y, and y with respect to u is the second path, and the third path is w with respect to z, and z with respect to u ይሆናል ማለት ነው so this is the required partial derivative of w with respect to u okay አሁን ሌላ ምን ሰራው ምንድነው the partial derivative of w with respect to v ምን ይመስላል የሚለው ነው okay v ጋር ለመድረስ ሶስት ፓዞች አሉን partial derivative with respect to x and x with respect to v similarly partial derivative of w with respect to y and y with respect to v ያለን እንሄዳለን ማለት ነው so dw by dv becomes the partial derivative of w with respect to x with respect to v ይሆናል this is the first path the second path is the partial derivative of w with respect to y and y with respect to v and the third path is the partial derivative of w with respect to z and z with respect to v ይሆናል ማለት ነው so this is the required partial derivative of w with respect to v okay ይሄ ይሆናል ማለት ነው chain rule apply ስናደርግ ለተጠየቀው ጥያቄ the required chain rule is this one ወደ c part ስንመጣ w is a function of one variable okay it's a function of one variable t okay w is a function of one variable t but t is a function of three variable x y z okay t is a function of x y and z እንደሆነ እናውቃለን okay and these all x y and z are functions of two variables x is a function of u and v y is a function of u and v z is a function of u and v okay this is the required tree diagram first of all okay ይሄ ካለን ማንን መመለስ እንችላለን the partial derivative of w with respect to u and the partial derivative of w with respect to v ምን እንደሚመስል እናያለን okay the partial derivative of w with respect to u ማለት okay u ጋር ለመድረስ ሶስት ፓዞች አሉን ማለት ነው so we will have this chain rule the partial derivative of w with respect to t times t with respect to x with respect to u this is one path okay plus the second path to reach u is the partial derivative of w with respect to t and t with respect to y and y with respect to u is the second path and the third path is the partial derivative of w with respect to t and t with respect to z and z with respect to u ይሆናል ማለት ነው this is the required chain rule for the first part okay ሁለተኛው የተጠየቅነው ምንድነው the partial derivative of w with respect to v ነው አሁንም v ጋር ለመድረስ ሶስት ፓዞች ይኖሩናል 1 2 3 okay ፓዙን ግን properly መጻፍ ይጠበቅብናል so the partial derivative of w with respect to v becomes the partial derivative of w with respect to t and t with respect to x. X with respect to v is one path. The second path will be the partial derivative of w with respect to t, t with respect to y, and y with respect to v. Okay, and the last path will be the partial derivative of w with respect to t, and t with respect to z, and z with respect to v ይሆናል ማለት ነው። So these are the required chain rule for the c part. c ላይ ለተጠየቅነው partial derivative የምንጠቀመው chain rule እነዚህን ይመስላል ማለት ነው።